Good evening. I'm Georgianne Benjamin, the Executive Director of Optum Idaho.
And I'm Ken Ritchie, the General Manager of KIVI 6 on Your Side. Tonight we bring you an hour-long documentary we are calling Finding Hope, Idaho's Opioid Crisis.
Optum Idaho, KIVI, and ABC affiliates statewide are partnering to bring to light the opioid crisis that plagues our state and nation. You will hear from a young woman who struggled with addiction and how it affected her entire family. You will hear from those who work on opioid addiction and abuse each day and how public and private organizations are working together to fight this epidemic.
This is an issue that affects nearly all of us, and that's why we initiated the Finding Hope series and have committed to dealing with this tough topic each week through awareness and education.
It is our honor to spend this evening with you and get to the heart of what is happening in Idaho. Our goal is to bring awareness to the work being done across our state to combat opioid abuse and addiction, as well as provide the loved ones with known resources for where they can get help. Thank you for joining us.
Optum Idaho presents Finding Hope, Idaho's Opioid Crisis.
The issue of opioid addiction in Idaho has torn families apart, strained the criminal justice system, and cost taxpayers millions. Good evening, I'm Michelle Edmonds.
And I'm Karen Lair. The number of overdoses on the rise, the number of arrests on the rise, and the amount of drugs seized off Idaho's highways also on the rise.
Although the number of prescriptions in Idaho is on the decline, we're still above the national average, with more than 70 painkiller prescriptions per 100 Idahoans. But the problem isn't just over the counter. In 2016, there were 23 times the number of heroin arrests in Idaho than in 2007. Just last year, 2% of Idaho high school students reported they had tried heroin, and nearly 14% said they'd used prescription drugs without a doctor's prescription. And the trend is proving deadly.
So where are these drugs coming from? As we'll talk about over the next hour, many are turning to pills bought from a pharmacy, but others are turning to the streets. And when it comes to heroin, we found out most of that is illegally entering our Idaho communities from Utah.
Every single day, somebody's tripping to Utah and bringing back heroin.
The #1 drug problem plaguing state police is trafficked into Idaho communities 7 days a week.
It's becoming more and more frequent.
5 years ago, we were seeing almost none, and right now, it's the biggest problem that we have in southeast Idaho.
Opioids, highly addictive and potentially fatal.
We can see anywhere from users to have the tiniest amounts to the traffickers that have ounces, and up to pounds of it.
Most drug-related investigations changing with the times, shifting focus from methamphetamine to heroin.
Is there anything illegal in your car?
It started a couple years ago with small quantity stuff. It started with points, which is 1/10 of a gram. Now it's moved on past that into grams and ounces, and we've seen a couple different cases where people are bringing in a ½ pound to a pound of heroin at a time.
From 2011 to 2016, state police saw a 958% increase in the number of heroin-positive items tested by state labs.
We're dealing with several of these instances every week.
The highest amounts coming from Ada County.
Out of my last 6 evaluations, 4 of those have come up with some sort of opiate in their system.
But where are the drugs coming from? Turns out most are transported into the state from Utah.
The vast majority of the cases that we work is being sourced out of Salt Lake City.
ISP officials say somebody can just drive down to Salt Lake City, buy about a gram of heroin for $50, then drive that same amount back into Idaho and sell it for at least 3 times that amount.
2 hours each way, yeah, so a 4-hour round trip, and they could double their money.
When it comes to heroin trafficking, that's anything more than 2 grams. The number of state lab cases more than doubled between 2015 and 2016. Canyon County seeing the highest rate increase, but falls 4th in the state behind Ada, Bannock, and Kootenai counties.
We don't have enough people, money, or manpower to work all the heroin cases that we could work.
Come here.
Corporal Tyler Shireman and his K-9 Bingo in Pocatello assist in traffic stops throughout District 5, often leading to drug-related arrests.
We ran the dog around. Dog alerted on the driver's door, jumped in, and then right here on the underneath the driver's seat area. So one shoebox in there that just has one baggie in it that's torn on the corner.
But police say their opioid problems don't end with heroin. According to the CDC, for every 100 people in the gem state, there are 70 painkiller prescriptions.
I know it's prescription medication, but people are obtaining these for illicit use, basically using it to get high and not in accordance to a prescription. Most of the times they're not even prescribed the medication.
CDC officials say 46 people die from prescription painkiller overdoses each day in the United States, and sadly some of those are in Idaho. Many law enforcement agencies now arming officers with Narcan, a nasal spray that counteracts the life-threatening effects of an opioid overdose.
Mostly young, 18 to 25-year-old kids, and we're having a significant number of overdoses and deaths resulting from heroin and opioid use.
Meridian police officer Jake Simon says he personally sees many of those users then take the wheel.
And it is scary to think of the amount of impairment I can see in somebody on heroin or a heavy dose of an opiate. It's scary to think that they would get behind the wheel of a 3, 4, 5, 6,000 pound vehicle and drive down the road.
Impacts to the public stretch beyond the scope of road safety, also leading to an uptick in crime.
Either through a petty theft, a minor theft situation, or even vehicle burglaries. They're using these types of situations to fund their habit.
A growing problem, police say, shows no signs of slowing down.
Paramedics also operate on the front lines of the opioid epidemic, responding to the scene of overdoses daily. While those calls also include overdoses involving alcohol and other drugs, a majority of them are opioid related. Most of those calls into dispatch will see a response from local police, fire, and paramedics. And of course, the minutes immediately following an overdose are critical in saving someone's life. That's where dispatch and local paramedics step in to help, administering first aid and the all-important opioid overdose antidote.
We bring basically a mobile emergency room to the patient's side. It is what they use in the emergency department, it's what we use on ambulances, and it may be what you find out in the community.
Some patients, though, need more than one dose, and it can be used for other medical purposes. In 2017, Ada County paramedics administered naloxone to about 180 patients, using 276 doses, essentially saving someone's life every other day. And keep in mind, those statistics don't even include patients who died before medics arrived or overdoses that did not need Narcan. It's also important to note that anyone can get naloxone over the counter at an Idaho pharmacy. In fact, doctors recommend if you know someone who takes opioids, you should have naloxone available with you at any moment. It can and will save a life.
Ada County Coroner Dottie Owens sees the outcome of the opioid epidemic in Idaho firsthand several times a week. She expects opioid overdose deaths in Ada County to top 100 by the end of the year, similar to the death count from 2017. But that's nearly twice as many overdose deaths as 2016, with the agency currently investigating nearly a dozen deadly overdoses every month. Owens joined us in our Town Hall Finding Hope Forum last month to share how day-to-day operations at her office have been impacted by the epidemic.
So this year's been pretty busy for us. With our overdoses, we actually have 123 that are opioid related in one way or another. That doesn't mean necessarily that it was an overdose. We do have 95 overdoses on the year, and 65 of those are opioid only. So a little bit of misconception with that is the rest of those are combinations. So we can have an opioid with methamphetamine or methadone and some other form of opioid. So we have to take caution. And we're actually talking about true numbers just for the sheer fact that there's so many different variations with it. Our numbers are up from last year, as we've consistently seen over the last few years, which is why it's become something that's very passionate to myself in my office. Honestly, we got tired of the knocking on the door and having to do those death notifications on these deaths that are just so unnecessary.
And when we talk about the people that are brought into your office, unfortunately, when it is too late, who are they and how old are they and what communities are they coming from? It's not just one specific area of our community, right?
No, the majority of our drug overdose victims are male in their 40s. 66% are actually white male, middle class. The remainder of that is white female for the majority. And they're 40 to 52 years old in the age range. So most of them are middle class wage earners.
And when we've spoken in the past about this, you've kind of talked about how the kind of mentality of the office is no longer surprised to see these overdoses, unfortunately, and you sometimes are dealing with more than one at a time, or you'll have a weekend where you have multiple deadly overdoses. How does it change the day-to-day operation?
It actually is. It's something that shock value is gone. Has been for several years, and so we're just to the point where it's almost as common to us internally as bringing in someone that died of natural causes. It's the same thing with our suicide rates, and so on a whole, it's affected the office in that way. There's no shock value left to any of these types of cases. It's very common for us to have overdoses.
So how do we put an end to the increasing overdoses? Most experts will point you directly to medication-assisted treatment, an option that draws criticism from many people who have never personally dealt with addiction because some feel it's controversial to substitute one drug for another. But state and even federal officials say MAT is the best option for opioid addicts hoping to reach recovery. Before you hear from a panel of experts discussing the topic, let's first break down what medication-assisted treatment is and how it works.
Patients will receive their daily medication.
Roughly 300 patients a day walk through the doors of Raise the Bottom Addiction Treatment Center in Boise, a medication-assisted treatment option often referred to as MAT.
Addiction isn't prejudice at all.
Patients include men and women of all ages fighting back against their addiction to opioids like heroin and prescription painkillers.
People stigmatize addiction as if it's a low-bottom thing, and it's not.
Once an opioid dependency is diagnosed by an in-house doctor, patients will begin receiving one of 3 FDA-approved medications to fight against the symptoms of painful withdrawal.
You have receptors in your brain, and they are craving these opiates, and so methadone covers those receptors so that they are no longer craving outside opiates.
Raise the Bottom Executive Director Jason Austin says the beauty of methadone is its ability to block those receptors without making a patient high, allowing them to live their lives without worrying about where their next fix will come from.
That hopelessness and that kind of fear and desperation, I think that's one of the most important things you see that disappears.
He says typically a major mental difference is noticeable within the first week of treatment.
They're starting to see that there's a light at the end of the tunnel because, all right, I just come here once a day, I continue to get this medication, I don't have to spend the rest of my day calling up my dealers, trying to meet them here, trying to figure out where we're going to do this, how am I going to get my money, how am I going to get the money to buy this, or what am I going to do in lieu of money to buy this.
Although they carry 3 treatment options, liquid methadone, dissolvable Suboxone tablets, and a monthly shot called naltrexone, most patients start with a low daily dose of methadone.
We make sure that it's liquid so they can swallow it in front of us and then talk back so we know that they've taken the medication. They're not going to go divert the medication in some way.
Some patients may eventually limit their clinic visits by switching to a take-home dose of Suboxone or methadone after proving certain criteria and meeting federal guidelines.
We don't just give it to the first person that walks in and says, I want Suboxone. They might not be a safe patient to have a prescription.
The ideal goal is for each patient to eventually reach abstinence, no longer needing MAT. But depending on how long and how heavily they've been using opioids, some patients may very well remain on a low dose of methadone for the rest of their lives.
Right now, treatment providers are limited in the number of FDA-approved drugs on the market to treat opioid use disorder. But this summer, the FDA issued new scientific recommendations aimed at encouraging companies to develop new drugs to treat addiction. Idaho health and welfare officials and local treatment centers hope the additional research will help get rid of the stigma surrounding medication-assisted treatment. Their main message, MAT, is not just providing drugs to a drug addict. It's giving someone the medication they need to manage their disease of addiction.
It's interesting how with the opiate epidemic, MAT's become more well known, but MAT is nothing more than what we do all the time in Western medicine. It's medication assisting a treatment. So a diabetic utilizes a medication to assist their treatment, which is changing their diet and their exercise. So in an opiate dependent person, the MAT is utilizing a medication to help stop the withdrawal, decrease the cravings, so that they can engage in the treatment portion to be able to hopefully have lifelong sobriety. The treatment portion is the key piece. It works together, but people forget that the treatment is most important. Why do I always want to pick up? Why do I want to always not have to feel what I'm feeling, right? So that's what MAT is.
How do you get there, Debbie, with treatment, with getting somebody in and actually getting them talking? Because I can understand where, I show up at Raise the Bottom and I say, I need this help, give me some more medicine. Like, that feels natural to me. But how do you get people really digging down into the root cause of what's happening? Because that is the stuff you don't want to share.
Right.
You don't want that out on Facebook, you know?
Absolutely. So the important thing that I would want to say is that first we have to tell people that we're proud of them and that this is courageous. Because if you can imagine what we just said, is you feel terrible and awful physically, but you feel terrible and awful, you're ashamed of what you've done. And people think you're bad, but you're not. So the first thing that we do with treatment is treat them kindly, encourage and welcome them, make it as easy as possible. And that's why we need lots of pathways into treatment. Bring people in, and then once they're in the four walls of treatment, whether that's a residential setting where they're staying there, or it's an outpatient setting, giving them the opportunity to have some meaningfulness and the hope. So what we've known for years and years is that spirituality and purpose in your life, alcoholics and drug addicts, and we're talking about the opiate addicts, they've become so isolated. Everything is about them and what's happening in their own head, which is all very negative. So getting them to realize that there is hope, your body will stop hurting, and you can reconnect to people that you've disappointed. You can reconnect with yourself. So for us, AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, Celebrate Recoveries, all the things that get people connected to each other is important. That's the foundation that we all in treatment, whether you use medication-assisted therapy or not, we all want people to get connected to other people, recovery centers, churches, fellowship halls. But how we do that is to put the treatment pillars. And I like to describe it as the person had a heart attack, the doctor goes in and maybe does some surgery, you get some medicine, then you go home to a loving family who says, we're going to get you to physical therapy, and we're going to change your diet with you. We need to do those same things for people in recovery from alcohol and drug addiction. We know what we're doing now. This is an infant recovery approach, but we know cognitive behavioral therapy works. Trauma-informed therapy. We need to help people figure out what happened. Bad stuff is happening to people, and we want to numb out from it. So whatever that trauma is, we as clinicians know how to treat the trauma. We know how to change people's behaviors and thinking, and to offer that hope. The last thing that I would say to everyone, whether it's law enforcement, family, keep bringing people to treatment and keep them engaged for as long as possible. It's not necessarily going to work the first time. It does for some people the first time, but you have to keep bringing people back. Keep reducing the shame and saying, okay, what did you learn the last time? Let's build upon that. And keep people in a continuum for as long as possible. Start with residential, end up in an intensive outpatient. Get your family of choice, your friends involved. Get open and speak about what you need from them, what you don't need from them. Get into recovery communities and have fun. The thing that is amazing is to talk with people that have 5 years, 1 year, 8 years, 20 years. Life can be joyous and fun. It gets easier every day that you stay sober. So know that there's hope.
To all the healers of symptoms, to all the defenders of employees, to all the sifters of data, revealers of insights, and preventers of worst-case scenarios, To all the seekers of cures, slashers of red tape, and ralliers of resources. To all the believers in better days ahead. If you won't rest until the world is healthier, neither will we. Optum, how well gets done.
Making the decision to get treatment or check into rehab to get clean from addiction often first means hitting rock bottom.
After 10 years of illegal drug use, today one Treasure Valley mom is more thankful than ever to be alive.
She shares her story of sobriety.
Can you say hi to Grandma? Say hi.
Life doesn't always go as planned. Just ask Cassidy Mendoza.
I mean, I thought I was going to be like everybody else, go to college. I would, you know, get married, have a family. I didn't know that I would be married to somebody that didn't want the best thing for me.
The new mom is celebrating 8 years of sobriety after living nearly a decade from fix to fix.
And it starts out slow, you know, just a few here and there, and then all of a sudden, I'm taking 5 at a time.
Eventually, her days revolved entirely around finding and doing drugs.
We just go from doctor to doctor, ER to ER, and that was my job, to make sure that we were high all day.
After falling in love with a drug addict, the former Nampa High cheer captain ended up hooked on methamphetamine, morphine, Percocets, and pretty much anything she and her then-husband could get their hands on.
Doing the opioids, it made me feel like I could just lose myself. I didn't have to worry about grief. I didn't have to worry about pain.
8 years in, her husband died of an opioid overdose.
The coroner called me and said that there was lines of pills sitting out. They were sitting there waiting, so it was an accident.
But even that wasn't enough to push Mendoza to seek a sober life.
I still didn't even get it. I didn't get it. So I go through the funeral, I go through everything. And I'm taking more pills. So this time I'm up to the big time stuff. Oxycontin, snorting up pills now by myself. I mean, Vicodin, everything.
Eventually, lying became easier than telling the truth.
I was so ashamed. I lost 10 years. I mean, there's years that I don't remember.
Cassidy says she'd resort to stealing money from her own mother to get high.
And that really made me feel bad. In the whole world, if anything did, that I hurt her.
Then in 2010, another wake-up call when Cassidy fell asleep driving on the highway near New Plymouth high on morphine and stolen methadone.
3 or 4 days later, I wake up in the hospital and the doctor asked me, "Why do you have methadone in your system?" I'm an addict, so I'm not going to tell the truth, right?
But surgeries to repair her crushed left arm just led her back to her biggest foe. 300 pain pills gone in 2 days.
But I didn't care. I didn't even, you know, I'm just kind of floating through life, not knowing what's going on or who I'm affecting.
Fast forward through 2 more years of regular drug use, and with a strong push from her supportive mother, Cassidy had an option.
I'm forever grateful to her.
Go to rehab or go to jail.
You can either be stubborn and continue a life of chaos, or you can turn it around and use that strength to get out of it. And that's what she did.
It wasn't easy, and withdrawal was even worse than she imagined.
I was sick for weeks.
But 90 days later, Cassidy walked out of those doors with the tools she needed to stay clean, now encouraging others struggling with addiction to know their strength.
We're strong women and strong men. We're strong people. We can do this. Take a Tylenol instead of a Percocet.
Her biggest inspiration to keep clean?
She's your reward.
Baby Marley.
For sure.
And when it comes to withdrawal, Cassidy says if she can do it, anyone can. But the most crucial component of her road to recovery was the steady support she saw from her mother.
We've had counselors, we've gone through counseling. It's not something at all that Cassidy did.
Yeah.
I mean, I initiate, then I have my mom, and I have all the people behind me that helped me learn the tools to be able to stay clean. And to know that when I wake up now that I don't want to use that, oh, there's something else, that it's exciting, I have new adventures, and nothing matters anymore because I'm worth it and I get to spend it with my family now.
So. You just had to learn that.
I had to learn it though,
yeah.
But How easy is that? That all you have to do is feel loved and be loved and know that you're worth it. But I spent months in the mirror looking at myself to try and say, I love you, Cassidy. But I didn't love myself as she did. So that made it worth it.
Do you think you would have ever gotten to where you are today if your mom wasn't as supportive?
If it wasn't my mom, I would have needed somebody else. We have to help each other. People are alone out there driving to go get the pills or whatever, going to get high, and someone needs to stop and say, I love you, you're worth it, let's do this, let's do it together no matter how long it takes, right?
Now, I do have a question for your mom, Twinette. You know, she kind of hit rock bottom multiple times where normally that would be enough of a wake-up call for somebody, but you never left her side and you never gave up. How did you keep that going, and what advice would you have for other families that may be watching this that are going through that now?
Well, in our family we have a saying, unconditional love, and you have that. As a parent, you have to, it's just like when your one-year-old starts to walk, you know they're going to fall down, and you know they're going to cry, and you know they're going to get hurt. When they're an adult, you know they're going to get hurt. And when Cassidy was at the point where she had to be either walking or falling down all the time, I had to hold her responsible. And for a mother, that is the hardest thing in the world, to let go. Either you do this with my help, or you can't be in my life. And I went to a program that supported that, and seeing the people in that program, they were all members of family members who had someone that was addicted. And they all struggled with the same thing. How can I help? How can I get them through this? How can I do this? It's not I. It's letting them go and letting them do it and being there to support them.
Cassidy has her new baby as motivation to stay sober, but many moms don't always have the option of getting clean before getting pregnant. A team at St. Luke's Hospital in Boise is making sure pregnant mothers who have a substance use disorder get the best possible care. And tonight, a brave mother introduces us to the son she did everything to protect.
He came out just screaming.
Meet Liam Jess Vetter. The 4-pound, 13-ounce preemie was born at 34 weeks. But it wasn't his early arrival that worried doctors. They were on heightened alert, watching for symptoms of withdrawal. Sarah is a former meth and opioid user. When she got pregnant, the LeGrand, Oregon mom sought out help from a clinic at St. Luke's Hospital. Dr. Seib and his team specialize in treating pregnant mothers with substance use disorder. We first introduced you to Sarah back in May when she found out she was having a boy.
And then this one right here is my favorite because it's his face.
Sarah wanted to make sure she stayed sober during the trials of pregnancy. So Dr. Seib prescribed buprenorphine. The medicine cuts cravings for opioids, and studies show it does not cause birth defects.
If we're not taking care of mom, you know, everybody's always worried about, oh my God, look what I'm putting in my body. Well, you know, but what you forget is if you're not healthy and you're doing unhealthy things, like maybe using drugs off the street, or maybe doing, you know, getting high and then withdrawing, you know, those types of things really are what put the pregnancy at risk.
He's been doing amazing and I feel great.
Infants can experience withdrawals from buprenorphine, which is why Liam is closely monitored in the NICU. But so far, he's acting like any other preemie.
He hasn't had any signs. So yeah, he's perfect.
6 weeks.
Okay. Throughout Sarah's pregnancy, Dr. Seib gradually lowered the dose of buprenorphine. Sarah says she stopped taking it completely the week before Liam was born.
You know, and for anybody to say that moms on this medicine, the babies are not safe or healthy, I beg to differ, because I took that medicine for a good portion of my pregnancy, and I don't know, to me it looks like a pretty perfect baby. He's doing really good.
Liam Jess, or LJ, as his family calls him, is thriving. Sarah says her pregnancy and the care she received has made her a stronger, more confident mother.
He's just so in love with him.
Sarah plans to continue counseling and working with her sponsor. Dr. Seib says pregnancy is a time when women are motivated to change. That's why the St. Luke's Clinic and treatment leaders across the state are working tirelessly to overcome the stigma of addiction and treat substance use disorder as a disease.
The opiate use disorder, that's the terms we use these days, is really a disease. We come from a time, though, 50 and 60 years ago, where no, that was a weakness if you drank or you did some other things. Opiates really are different. They're not the same. That is, the brain responds. So if someone gets into a friend's supply or your grandparents' supply of medicine, at 3 to 4 days, your brain can start to change, and you can start that addiction kind of scenario. We haven't had anything quite like that before. So having that happen, the problem is that it hasn't been open for conversation. And so one of the things that we really want to talk about is having the conversation, sharing with other people, and I think that's how you get back to dealing with the stigma.
Most doctors will agree, though, opioids do serve an important purpose for certain patients, and it's important to note not all opioid users are opioid addicts. So do you know the difference between drug dependence and drug addiction? Dr. Michael Severson at St. Luke says physical dependence on a drug simply means your body responds with withdrawal symptoms when the medication is stopped, while addiction is more behavioral.
I often tell the patients, if you're chewing it, snorting it, trying to get high, overusing it, those kind of things are signs of addiction.
According to the CDC, 1 in 4 patients taking opioids long-term will develop an addiction. Dr. Severson says while opioids can be helpful in certain situations, the more the opioids are used, the higher a person's tolerance will get. That's when patients need to start paying close attention to their actual pain level. And his main pointer, only take them for as long as you need to.
So what if you're injured or undergo surgery? Your physician may very well send you home with a script for opioids. But what should you know before you fill that very first prescription? We asked the experts.
Be empowered as a patient. Ask the question if your provider, talks about giving you an opioid. Ask, well, do I have a non-opioid, alternative that I could take? How long are you prescribing this for me? Do I have to get to it? How long do I think I might need this? Let them know if there's addiction that runs in your family. Ask about addiction. Can I become addicted to this medication? I really think the more that you know as a patient, customer, it empowers you to take control of that and try to minimize your risk of taking opioids when maybe something else would work.
Listen up, heart disease. You too, unnecessary ER visits. And hey, unmanaged depression? Don't get too comfortable. We're talking to you, cost inefficiencies and data without insights. And fragmented care? Stop getting in the way of patient recovery and pay attention. Every single one of you is on our list. At Optum, we're partnering across the health system to tackle its biggest challenges. Optum, how well gets done.
With more and more Idahoans struggling with addiction to prescription painkillers, many people are placing blame on doctors and the practice of prescribing these addictive meds.
But still, just last month, the FDA approved of a new ultra-powerful opioid called Disuvia. It's 10 times more powerful than fentanyl, making it 1,000 times more potent than morphine. Disuvia comes as a tablet in an applicator that healthcare providers administer under the tongue. Critics blasted the agency for bringing a new opioid to market as the nation faces increasing opioid overdose deaths. The FDA insists it is managing the opioid crisis, saying the new drug is needed by patients to manage pain.
This fall, 162 students began classes at Idaho's first medical school, and one big area of focus for their modern curriculum is prescription practices, aiming to improve education of the available alternatives to prescription opioids.
Even here in Idaho, we have a major opioid problem.
The dean of Idaho's new College of Osteopathic Medicine knows the next generation of physicians in the U.S. can play a major role in combating the opioid epidemic.
We'll really make a big difference with the opioid crisis.
Students now know how dangerously addictive some medications can be.
Patients used to get opioids from their physician without a lot of explanation in many cases.
When I went to medical school, we didn't really have any appreciation of how addicted these opioid prescriptions could be.
According to the CDC, for every 100 people in Ada County, there are 72 opioid prescriptions. In Canyon County, it's 76. And in more rural areas like Caribou, Cassia, Bannock, and Bear Lake, the number of prescriptions outnumbers the population.
When I was in medical training, you know, the one thing that we were really taught was that if someone is truly in pain, there's no risk or very little risk that they could ever get addicted to that medication. And now we know that was not true.
So newly enrolled students will be learning under the most up-to-date federal guidelines when it comes to prescribing practices, even doing mock medical appointments with actors, training students to spot patients who are prescription shopping from doctor to doctor.
Looks just like a physician's office, being able to counsel patients on such things as opioids and opioid addictions, etc.
Instead of just learning about what medications can be used to treat different conditions, students will also learn about how social and psychological factors can play a role in the development of drug addiction and dependence.
Educating our students on how to counsel their patients on the potential risks associated with drug dependence and drug addiction.
Chair of Pharmacology Dr. Luke Mortensen says students will also learn about alternatives to opioids to treat chronic pain,
such as the steroidal and non-steroidal anti-inflammatories. Certain drugs within the antidepressant class of drugs have also been shown to be very useful now in certain chronic pain syndromes.
Things like physical therapy, things like heat and cold, or acupuncture. There's all sorts of things out there that these young doctors are learning.
New tools for the physician side of the prescription pad that may ultimately save lives right here in Idaho. One of those alternative tools now attracting chronic pain patients is acupuncture. Acupuncturists even use a specific protocol dealing with points in the ears that's shown to help some patients detoxing off opioids. It's supposed to help with anxiety, irritability, and relaxation by connecting with the liver, the kidneys, and the lungs. We spoke with one Treasure Valley veteran who swears by the treatment, now living opioid-free.
We're going to do the ear protocol for Mark here.
My honest opinion, if it wasn't for them, I don't know what I would do.
Before trying acupuncture, veteran Mark Diva spent nearly 10 years of his life taking Vicodin and Percocet daily as prescribed to treat chronic pain.
All the medication would do is just mask the pain. I would get some relief for about 4 to 6 hours, and then it was time to take another dose of the medication.
He began building a tolerance, eventually increasing his dose, and the side effects just led to more medications.
And after a while, I just felt like it just wasn't hitting me.
So many years ago, at the advice of a friend, he decided to try acupuncture.
I tried everything else, let's try this.
Like many, he was skeptical at first.
The next point is liver.
But Mark says he saw results right away.
I felt something change in my body. I felt like energy, something happened, some kind of connection took place.
That connection, simply put, is reinvigorating blood flow to certain organs of the body.
I like to think of the needles as kind of antennas that are communicating with your brain and receiving communication from your brain about what needs to happen in your body to get healthy.
It seemed to unblock those issues that I was having throughout my body. I could literally feel from my toes to my kneecap something tingling in between. And I could feel after the treatment was done, I had no more pain in that area.
Mark seemed pretty convincing, so I tested it out.
They're about 4 or 5 hair strands thick. You might have a sensation of dullness, achiness, throbbiness, and that's considered therapeutic. Okay. Do any of the needles feel uncomfortable to you? Most people feel really relaxed. They take a little nap.
The medical profession is really picking up on this and using it more and more.
Dr. Alan Shaw at St. Luke's in Meridian regularly uses acupuncture to relieve pain for cancer patients.
So with an acupuncture point here, I can address problems with the teeth, I can address problems with the lower abdomen, with the low back, and with circulation in the feet.
The needle-based treatment, used for thousands of years in China, is relatively new to the U.S., used to treat all kinds of discomfort.
Chronic pain, acute pain, pain left over from surgeries, pain from illnesses.
Mark even uses the acupuncture to treat his PTSD and sleep disturbances. And now it's been 8 months since he took an opioid.
I feel great. I'm telling you, the acupuncture is working. It really is.
One oral surgeon in Nampa knows his surgeries may very well be the first time his young patients getting their wisdom teeth taken out are introduced to an opioid prescription. That's why this year he's using a new option, sending many of his patients home opioid-free. After many oral and facial surgeries, Dr. John Malin is now using a long-acting local anesthetic called Exparel, a shot that numbs the site of surgery, helping his patients battle post-op pain without pills. His mission is simple, trying to minimize the use of opioids, and so far it's proving successful. We caught up with some patients who never even had to fill their backup prescriptions.
You know, I just didn't feel any pain, and so I didn't think it was necessary. After like the first day, I was able to kind of go back to most of the tasks I was doing, and I didn't waste a lot of my time.
Dental hygienist Alyssa Bycandy was surprisingly pleased after she chose the Exparel route when her 16-year-old daughter needed to get her wisdom teeth removed.
She never had any problems. She never came to me, and I kept asking her, "Are you uncomfortable?" "No, I'm doing great."
So she didn't have to take any opioids?
Nope, we didn't even feel it.
Right now, there is just one pharmaceutical company producing Exparel, but it's catching the attention of doctors nationwide. Dr. Malin hopes local anesthetics will become standard practice among oral surgeons and help cut back on the number of prescription pills circulating in the Gem State. Almost every time we share a story online related to the opioid epidemic, the comments pour in, pushing for the legalization of marijuana.
Many people feel access to medical pot could drastically cut back on the use of prescription opioids in Idaho, and the desire to live prescription pill-free is pushing some residents over the border to legally smoke and grow their own pot in Oregon. People like Jerry Cush.
A Jaeger, there's a Gorilla Glue, and a Sour Diesel. This one here is a Red Dragon. I've never grown it before, so I'm not sure how it's going to turn out.
Jerry Cush didn't always grow and harvest marijuana in his own backyard.
Not budding or blooming yet.
The current Oregon resident,
most of the strains I'm growing this year are kind of new.
Used to call Idaho home.
It'll get more so once they get ready to harvest.
Like many, Cush has a handful of conditions requiring medical care: stomach issues, fibromyalgia, and the need for antacids and antidepressants.
You'd take sometimes 2 or 3 prescriptions just to fight side effects of the morphine, and then you have side effects from some of these medications, and some of them can ruin your life.
On that list of meds, a high daily dose of morphine or Oxycontin to treat chronic pain.
And they kept increasing it. I was taking 90 milligrams of morphine 3 times a day.
The morphine ended up morphing Cush into an antisocial version of himself he didn't want to be.
A lot of times lethargic, didn't want to do anything.
So in 2014, after 25 years of use, Cush decided he'd had enough.
I don't like taking pills. I was determined I was going to come off of it.
Over the course of 6 months, Cush was successfully able to slowly decrease the morphine and increase the marijuana.
Basically, marijuana's been the best for me all along.
But while living in Idaho, Cush says medicating with marijuana became stressful, constantly in fear of being arrested and sent to jail.
It got to where I was kind of paranoid to go anywhere, to do anything.
So he made the monumental decision to move to Oregon.
It was hard because I was farther away from my family. Didn't see them as often.
But Cush says the change in physical well-being was well worth it, saying the benefits of marijuana far outweigh the complications he came to expect with multiple prescription pills.
The only thing I take for pain is marijuana. This way I know what goes on my medicine.
With a doctor's note and a grow permit from the state, he's now just one more Oregon resident legally growing his own pain meds on his own property. And without the pot,
I know it would be very difficult to live with the things that I've got, without it.
It will be interesting to watch, though, in the new year to see if more Idahoans will decide to make that trip across the border to try to manage their pain with marijuana.
Of course, Karen, starting in January, the city of Ontario will legalize pot sales. Ontario, of course, only about an hour's drive from Boise.
To all the healers of symptoms. To all the defenders of employees. To all the sifters of data, revealers of insights, and preventers of worst-case scenarios. To all the seekers of cures, slashers of red tape, and ralliers of resources. To all the believers in better days ahead. If you won't rest until the world is healthier, neither will we. Optum, how well gets done.
What started with teenagers raiding their parents' medicine cabinets at parties ended with the death of a 19-year-old Boise man whose life, like so many others, was cut short by opioids.
So now, Boise City leaders are joining those working to combat the opioid epidemic by taking the fight to court. The lawsuit filed in early November accuses 20 pharmaceutical drug makers of deceiving doctors about health risks and promoting opioids while downplaying the risk of addiction. After tragically losing his 19-year-old son Carter, Boisean Scott Fisher is left with questions. Carter died from an opioid overdose in September, just a few months after graduating from Boise High School.
How does a kid who's a Little League football player and soccer player and loved to play baseball, started duck hunting when he was 10 years old, he just loved the outdoors. How does a kid go from that to an opioid addiction?
While Fisher says he supports the lawsuit, his first hope is to reduce stigma of addiction. Through his grief, he's been working with organizations that provide education and funding for local partnerships. Boise isn't alone. The opioid epidemic has reached such a level of danger that several cities across the country are suing pharmaceutical companies for the part that they've played.
Matt Sizemore sat down with Boise Mayor Dave Beater to discuss why a lawsuit is the best option.
In 2013, the city of Boise saw one death stemming from an opioid overdose. Just last year, that number jumped to 110. Seeing such a staggering jump, Idaho's capital city has taken action by suing 20 pharmaceutical companies for their role.
These companies have acted irresponsibly. They knew of the dangers and continued to really push these prescription drugs out, these opioids out. Doctors overdid it. The pharmaceutical company knew of those dangers, and there's a lot of similarities to the tobacco companies, is what we found. That despite knowing these things, and the addictive nature of these drugs, they continue to prescribe and to ignore those dangers.
What exactly was it that made you and your colleagues decide this is a lawsuit that needs to happen here in Boise to make change?
Well, we've been looking at the situation for over the course of this whole last year, and have been contacted by various entities to join, and we've done the legwork and believe it was time. And also those numbers, I mean, what we see locally, we can't allow that to continue. And I think our getting into the lawsuit and our filing is also an important piece.
It's a fight the mayor thinks will be tough, but fortunately, Boise is not alone.
I don't want to downplay how difficult it's going to be, but there are dozens and dozens of cities involved. We believe there'll be many more.
And he believes that evidence as well as common sense will prevail.
These are sophisticated companies. It's a little hard to claim they didn't know things when they're as knowledgeable, as data-driven as any companies on the globe. This is an epidemic that we can cure. We can certainly make headway, and we think even more than that.
The suit seeks compensation from the drug makers for promoting opioids to treat chronic health issues while downplaying the risk of addiction.
It also alleges doctors were deceived about associated health risks, and doctors known to overprescribe were specifically targeted.
At least 27 states and many other local municipalities have filed similar suits against the drug companies.
Listen up, heart disease. You too, unnecessary ER visits. And hey, unmanaged depression? don't get too comfortable. We're talking to you cost inefficiencies and data without insights. And fragmented care? Stop getting in the way of patient recovery and pay attention. Every single one of you is on our list. At Optum, we're partnering across the health system to tackle its biggest challenges. Optum, how well gets done.
Every 12 minutes in America, someone dies of an opioid overdose.
But for addicts just released from prison, that risk is 125% higher. Critics like Monica Forbes would say we're treating a medical disease with the criminal justice system, an approach that just doesn't work. She's now an expert on opioid addiction and recovery after getting hooked on a doctor's prescription for back pain, ultimately overdosing multiple times and spending 5 years behind bars.
One pill seemed to lead to another, and the lower doses of Vicodin and stuff that I had started on were nothing to me.
She lost her job, her family, her self-respect. It took years to recover, and now, 14 years clean, she helps others deal with their addiction through the Peer Wellness Center. One area she wishes would improve: addiction treatment for inmates while in jail.
The treatment programs that are provided in the criminal justice system are meant to address criminal behavior, not necessarily substance abuse, so they have that shame-based component to them.
If they relapse upon release, it's often fatal because their body's tolerance is reduced. Advocates for in-jail MAT programs also point out the cost of incarceration is about $60 a day per inmate. The cost for methadone treatment is about $12 a day. A brand new pilot program within the Idaho Department of Correction is testing it out, offering MAT to 50 people in the Ada and Canyon County justice systems struggling with opioid addiction.
Ideally, it will give addicts a chance to get clean and stay out of prison.
You have to give people an opportunity to change.
50 probationers and parolees in the Treasure Valley will soon be part of a pilot program aimed at assisting offenders struggling with addiction.
If they're having struggles with opioid use, they can be referred by the probation officer.
MAT has recently become a more widely accepted way to treat opioid addiction, in this case by medicating addicts with a daily dose of Suboxone with the help of Terry Riley Health Services.
They start them out with a 3-day supply of pills. And then as the offender progresses, as they're checking in, as they're doing well, that prescription may be extended for a longer and longer period of time if they're compliant.
Those in the program could be subject to drug testing at any visit to ensure the medication is being used properly.
And if it's too high or too low, that would indicate either they're not taking their medication or maybe they're trying to introduce another opioid.
While the thought of using medication-assisted treatment for inmates or probationers is new to Idaho, it's already being done with success in other states. A recent study in Rhode Island showed MAT dramatically lowered the number of fatal overdoses among released inmates. In the first 6 months of 2017, less than 6% of the fatal overdose victims were recently released from jail, compared to more than 14% the year before, which suggests the program helped decrease overdose deaths in that population by 60%.
We hear a lot of positive things, we see a lot of positive research, we're hearing good things, but we don't have the data right now to indicate that it's something we would recommend to our board.
When it comes to funding the program, a year's worth of treatment will cost about $5,000 per patient, so $250,000 total, but that comes from a pre-existing budget already dedicated to drug and alcohol services.
They've only been working with this program for a few months now, and they're already learning what's working and what's not. What are you guys seeing so far in the pilot? Have you learned anything yet? Have we selected enough individuals to really follow it quite yet?
It's early. We're not even 3 months into it, but we're already learning, and that is the goal of the pilot, is that we can go back to our Board of Correction and then possibly legislatively to make recommendations on what we see as working. And what we are seeing right now is this is an outpatient program. If they're too high in acuity level, if they need residential services, they're probably not the most appropriate individual to be doing a community-based outpatient service. As well, if they're so destabilized, if they don't have any of those anchors in the community, employment, are they still reporting to their officer? Is the individual, do they have a residence? If they don't have some of those basic anchors, they're so destabilized, then they probably need to go to a residential placement program or even a possible period of incarceration just to stabilize them and then release them back to the community.
That's what the pilot program's all about, right? You're learning.
That's what we're trying to learn, and what we want to do is be good stewards of taxpayer dollars. So the pilot will give us a good focus, and in a year from now we can make those recommendations on, okay, this is what we see is going to make the biggest difference in our community.
A second pilot program underway in the Treasure Valley aims to keep offenders with opioid addiction out of jail in the first place.
This program also just beginning, and it will only take on 10 people facing charges for non-violent crimes, giving them the option of going to jail or entering a treatment program. If those involved successfully complete the outpatient pilot, including both therapy and medication-assisted treatment, their original charge can be reduced or dismissed. The inspiration for the program comes from years of officer experience dealing with these same offenders time after time. And although the $100,000 program will be funded by taxpayer money, BPD says in the long run, it's the cheaper option.
If we can get them into treatment as opposed to them being arrested over and over and over again, that keeps them out of the jail system, that keeps them out of the prison population as well, and it also keeps them out of the hospitals. When they overdose and they go to the hospital and they're staying in the ICU, that costs a lot of money, and a lot of these people don't have insurance, so we're still paying that bill as well. So I would ask anybody, what's more important? Is it we divert them one time and see if it helps them out, or do you put them back in jail or the hospital 10 or 11 more times?
The growing opioid epidemic in Idaho now lands squarely on new leadership at the State House.
Governor-elect Brad Little recognizes recent efforts to curb the crisis, but he also understands the continued need for expanding access to addiction treatment.
As your next governor, I can assure you I'm aware of the devastating effects opioid and prescription abuse and addiction have on our communities. I must commend the efforts of all those involved in putting together this special presentation. This subject is difficult. No doubt it was not easy for Cassidy and her mother to share their story, but it is an important message that they are not alone. Many Idahoans have been personally affected by this crisis as it is far-reaching. You heard from Idaho's public safety officers. You see the effects opioids have on our communities and how they're trying to stop the transport of illegal substances throughout the state. You've heard from medical specialists about the difficulty of breaking addiction. It is by coming together for productive discussions such as this that we can improve collaboration on answers to address this problem. Fighting opioids and drug abuse is something my administration is committed to. Together, the governor's office and other state agencies, the public sector, and caring individuals are already in the process of developing practical solutions. It is difficult to be optimistic about the devastation illegal drugs wreak on our communities, but it should be comforting to know that so many around the state care and are willing to dedicate their time and energy to finding solutions. I am optimistic about the direction of our state. By joining forces like this program, we are taking the right step forward in making a difference in addressing this issue.
Well, as you've seen over the past hour, for Idaho to find hope in the opioid crisis, it's going to take communities working together to come up with real-world solutions to fit their concerns.
But the first step for everyone is to talk about addiction as a disease in order to reduce the stigma. And if you need help, don't wait. Don't be afraid to ask for it.
The Addiction Resource Center is a good place to start. It breaks down available treatment options in your county depending on what kind of services you're looking for. It's a national nonprofit that's recently expanded its database in Idaho to connect people across the state. The expansion includes more providers and covers more areas. You can also always call their confidential phone line at 1-833-301-HELP.
There's another immediate resource out there as well. You can always pick up the phone and simply dial 211 to get access to help.
And if you want to see more of our Finding Hope coverage from the past 6 months, head to 6onyourside.com and click on the Finding Hope tab. We'd also love to hear from you, your stories and your concerns about this crisis. Send us an email through our website or reach out on Facebook.
Thank you for watching Finding Hope, Idaho's opioid crisis, presented by Optum Idaho.